Many people imagine samurai as noble warriors with katana, living by a strict code of honor, but almost everything we think of them as emerged hundreds of years after the birth of the samurai. The true history of the samurai is much more unexpected. It begins not with great battles, but with ordinary landowners, fear of bandits, and the struggle for survival. Today we will follow the samurai's rise from little-known armed retainers to the men who ruled Japan for nearly 7 centuries. To understand the origins of the samurai, we need to go back more than 1,000 years. At that time, Japan was not yet a unified state in the traditional sense. A central government existed, but its influence weakened further and further from the capital. In distant lands, raids, robberies, and armed conflicts between local clans were becoming more frequent. The imperial army was too far away to come to the rescue quickly. Therefore, wealthy landowners began to create their own armed units. It was these people who would later become known throughout the world as samurai. The word samurai itself comes from the ancient Japanese verb saburao, which means to serve. Originally, a samurai was not a master, but a man who served his master. His main duty was not glory, but the protection of his master's family, lands, and property. Contrary to popular belief, the first samurai didn't fight with katanas. Their main weapon was the long Japanese bow, the yumi. Most battles began with an exchange of arrows rather than sword duels. The first samurai did not fight at all for most of their time. They accompanied caravans, collected taxes, guarded roads, and maintained order on the lands of their master. But it was precisely this constant service that gradually turned them into the best professional warriors in Japan. While the court nobility enjoyed a luxurious life in the capital of Heian-kyo, a completely new power was being born in the distant provinces. Landowners increasingly trusted their safety not to officials, but to armed units that were ready to fight at any moment. The more dangerous life became, the more valuable experienced warriors became. Gradually, military service ceased to be a temporary occupation. Sons were taught the art of war by their fathers from childhood. This is how the first hereditary families of professional warriors appeared. Their life differed from the life of ordinary peasants in literally everything. While the peasants grew rice, the future samurai spent hours practicing with bows, spears, and horseback riding. The horse was one of the main symbols of wealth and military power. Not everyone could afford a war horse. This is why the first samurai were not just swordsmen, but first and foremost elite horse archers. By the 11th century, the samurai's influence had grown so rapidly that some of them could already rival the ancient aristocratic families. Among the many military families, 2 clans stood out in particular. Their names will forever remain in the history of Japan. These were the Taira and Minamoto clans. For many years they served the imperial court, but gradually began to fight with each other. Their rivalry will forever change the history of the country. At the end of the 12th century, tensions reached their peak. The war that would later be called the Genpei War began. It was in this war that the samurai would show for the first time that they were capable of determining the fate of the entire country, and not just individual provinces. This was no longer a struggle for the lands of one feudal lord. At stake was power over all of Japan. By 1180, tensions between the Taira and Minamoto clans had reached the point of no return. For generations, they had been vying for influence at the imperial court, but now the dispute was to be settled by the sword. Thus began the Genpei War, one of the most famous conflicts in Japanese history. It will last almost 5 years and will forever change the structure of the Japanese state. At the beginning of the war, the advantage was on the side of the Taira clan. Their army was larger, and their influence at court seemed unshakable. But the Minamoto clan had a leader who was able to unite the disparate forces. His name was Minamoto no Yoritomo. While Yoritomo was building a strong alliance, another man was becoming a true war legend. His name is Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Even 800 years later, he is considered one of the most talented military leaders in Japanese history. His victories are still studied by historians and military experts. One of the most famous battles of the war was the Battle of Ichinotani. The fortress was considered virtually impregnable. Most commanders expected a conventional frontal attack. But Yoshitsune devised a completely different plan. He ordered a small group of horsemen to descend the almost vertical mountainside. Many considered this maneuver suicidal. However, the unexpected attack from the rear completely destroyed the Taira defenses. Victory had been achieved by the Minamoto against all expectations. But an even greater battle lay ahead. It was this battle that would bring an end to the decades-long war. In the spring of 1185, Japan's two greatest armies met not on land, but at sea. This place was called the Dan-no-Ura Strait. It was here that the fate of the entire country would be decided. The Taira clan was at home on the water. For generations, they had been skilled sailors and knew the local currents perfectly. In the first hours of the battle, it seemed victory would be theirs. Arrows obscured the sky, and the waves turned red. The samurai clashed in hand-to-hand combat right on the decks of the rocking ships. But then an event occurred that completely changed the course of the battle. One of the Taira commanders defected to the Minamoto. He revealed the location of the ship carrying the young Emperor Antoku. The Minamoto archers immediately concentrated their attack on that very spot. Realizing that defeat was inevitable, many members of the Taira clan made a terrible decision. They chose death rather than captivity. His grandmother, unwilling to surrender her child to the enemy, threw herself into the sea, clutching him tightly to her. Thus ended the history of the great Taira clan. 6-year-old Emperor Antoku perished with them. Victory finally passed to the Minamoto. But the most important thing happened after the war was over. The victors no longer wished to depend on the imperial court. In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo received the title of shogun. Formally, the emperor continued to rule the country, but true power now rested with the military ruler. Thus, the first shogunate, Japan's military government, came into being. From this point on, the samurai ceased to be mere professional warriors. They became the state's new ruling elite. After the war ended, The samurai gained power, but with it came new responsibilities. Now they had to not only win battles, but also govern entire provinces. It was then that the unique culture of the samurai class began to take shape. Being born into a samurai family meant being prepared for a harsh life from the very first day. As early as 5 or 6 years old, boys began to learn discipline, respect for elders, and the use of weapons. Their day began long before dawn. After a short breakfast, hours of training followed. A samurai had to be equally proficient with a bow, spear, sword, and horsemanship. A weakness in any one of these skills could cost one's life on the battlefield. But physical strength was far from the only requirement. A true warrior had to maintain composure even in the face of death. Many samurai studied literature, philosophy, and calligraphy. They believed that intelligence without strength was useless, but strength without intelligence could also lead to death. Samurai armor was also very different from European armor. They were assembled from hundreds of small plates connected by strong silk cords. This design made the armor both strong and flexible. This allowed the warrior to confidently shoot a bow without removing the armor. Particular attention was paid to the helmet, or kabuto. Many helmets were decorated with enormous horns, crescent moons, or golden symbols to instill fear in the enemy even before the battle began. The masks, or menpo, were no less terrifying. They protected the face, but at the same time created the image of an almost supernatural warrior. On the battlefield, the enemy saw not an ordinary man, but a cold and frightening face made of iron. Today, the image of the samurai is shrouded in romance. He is portrayed as a noble warrior who never lies, never betrays, and is always ready to sacrifice himself for the sake of honor. But the real story was much more complex. Samurai were, first and foremost, professional soldiers. Their primary duty was to carry out their master's orders, even if those orders were cruel. Loyalty to the master was often valued above compassion for enemies. That's why many decisions were made not by the heart, but by duty. Movies often depict noble one-on-one duels. In reality, most battles were chaotic and brutal clashes between large armies. Sometimes the outcome of a battle was decided not by the best swordsman, but by a successful ambush or the betrayal of allies. Despite their harsh life, samurai didn't spend all their time at war. In times of peace, many of them governed lands, collected taxes, and maintained order within their domains. Some became talented administrators, judges, and even poets. For a true samurai, the ability to write beautifully was considered almost as important as swordsmanship. They devoted many hours to the tea ceremony, the study of philosophy, and Zen Buddhism. All this helped maintain calm, even in the most difficult moments of life. But even in times of peace, everyone understood that war could break out at any moment. Therefore, weapons were always close at hand, and training never ceased. Gradually, the samurai class became increasingly influential. But the bloodiest period in Japan's history lay ahead. By the mid-15th century, Japan had once again plunged into chaos. The old order was crumbling, and the shogunate's power was rapidly weakening. The country split into dozens of principalities, each dreaming of dominance. Thus began the Sengoku period, the era of warring provinces. For nearly a century and a half, the war continued. Allies became enemies, and yesterday's enemies unexpectedly united against a common foe. Loyalty and betrayal constantly changed the course of history. During this time, Japan's most famous generals emerged. Every Japanese schoolchild still knows their names. One of them was Takeda Shingen, the man known as the Tiger of Kai. He became famous for the lightning-fast charges of his cavalry. His main rival was Usugi Kenshin, nicknamed the Dragon of Echigo. Their rivalry became legendary in Japanese history. However, the most famous man of the era was neither Shingen nor Kenshin. His name was Oda Nobunaga. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not afraid to break with old traditions. He understood that the world was changing and the art of war must change with it. It was at this time that a weapon appeared in Japan that would forever change the fate of the samurai. It was loud, slow, and imperfect, but its influence was colossal. In 1543, a Chinese ship carrying Portuguese traders landed on the shores of Japan. They brought with them an unusual weapon, one the Japanese had never seen before. It was a matchlock gun, simple in design, yet capable of piercing the armor that had protected samurai for centuries. Wine, I mean. Many samurai initially scoffed at the new weapon. They believed that no shot could replace mastery of a sword and bow. But one man saw a great future in this invention. That man was Oda Nobunaga. Rather than reject the new weapon, he ordered its mass production. Very soon, thousands of warriors were training to shoot as confidently as their ancestors had with bows. The decisive moment came in 1575. It was then that the famous Battle of Nagashino took place. Takeda's army was renowned for its cavalry. Many considered it virtually invincible. But Nobunaga had set a trap. He ordered his archers to form several ranks. While the first rank fired, the second loaded their weapons, and the third prepared to replace their comrades. Thanks to this tactic, the fire was practically non-stop. When Takeda's cavalry charged, they were met with a veritable wall of lead and smoke. The legendary army was routed. After this victory, it became clear the era was changing. From now on, victory was increasingly brought not only by personal skill and bravery, but also by discipline, sound tactics, and new technologies. However, the long-awaited unification of Japan lay ahead, but it was peace that would prove the samurai's most difficult test. After decades of incessant warfare, Japan finally approached the long-awaited peace, but this peace proved no less fateful than the bloodiest battles. The last man to unite the country was Tokugawa Ieyasu. In 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara took place. It pitted armies whose outcome determined the future of the entire country. The battle lasted only one day, but it was that day that determined Japan's fate for the next 2.5 centuries. Victory went to Tokugawa Ieyasu's army. A few years later, he became the new shogun and founded a dynasty that would rule until the 19th century. No-Edo period had begun. For the first time in generations, the country was plunged into lasting peace. But it was precisely this peace that placed the samurai in an unusual position. While their lives had previously consisted of constant warfare, now there was virtually no one to fight. Many became officials, judges, teachers, and administrators. They continued to carry swords, but drew them less and less frequently. At the same time, the code known today as Bushido became widespread. However, many will be surprised, there was no single book called Bushido at that time. The ideals of honor, loyalty, and self-control developed gradually from a multitude of traditions, teachings, and philosophical doctrines. The image of the noble samurai we know today was largely formed during times of peace, when greater opportunities arose to reflect on the past and transform warriors into symbols of national values. But nothing lasts forever. Very soon, foreign ships would arrive in Japan, and with them, the end of the samurai era. For over 250 years, Japan lived in relative peace. It seemed that the power of the shoguns and samurai would last forever. In 1853, a squadron led by American Commodore Matthew Perry approached the shores of Japan. The Japanese nicknamed them Black Ships, and their appearance was a real shock. The country, which had lived in near total isolation for centuries, was faced with the industrial age. It soon became clear that the old order no longer worked. The young government decided to completely transform the country. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration began. The emperor became head of state again, and the power of the shoguns ended. Reforms followed that forever changed the lives of the samurai. A modern conscript army was created, allowing any citizen, not just members of the military class, to serve. The samurai gradually lost their privileges. They stopped receiving state salaries. But not everyone was ready to accept these changes. Among them was a man who would later be called the last true samurai. His name was Saigo Takamori. In 1877, he led the Satsuma Rebellion against the new government. The samurai fought with incredible bravery, but against a modern army with rifles and artillery, their chances were minimal. After several months of fierce fighting, the rebellion was crushed. With it, the history of the samurai class ended. But did the samurai truly disappear? Probably not. Their values outlived the class itself. Discipline, responsibility, respect for tradition, and the desire to constantly improve oneself remain an important part of Japanese culture. Today, the samurai are no more, but their story lives on in books, museums, films, and the memories of millions of people around the world. Their journey began with small armed bands defending their lord's domains, and it ended with them forever changing the history of an entire country and becoming one of the most recognizable symbols of Japan. The history of the samurai reminds us that even the most powerful eras eventually end, but ideas, honor, and the memory of people can endure for centuries.